This week on The Record, the future of ICE in America. What's driving the latest debate around a possible government shutdown? Senator Dick Durbin is on the record. The voice of the voters, how Missouri courts might consider changes to the state constitution, and what message the Attorney General received from the ballot box after voters expressed their opinions on abortion. And what was Andrew Bailey doing getting into this big government vehicle with Tulsi Gabbard? All this coming up right now. Welcome to The Record. I'm Mark Maxwell. Washington is once again on the brink of a possible partial shutdown. When we look there, Senate Democrats blocked Homeland Security funding this week, pressing the White House for changes to immigration enforcement after deadly encounters that involved federal agents. President Donald Trump says he wants to avoid that shutdown, but Democrats say this is a moment that demands reform. That national standoff is now echoing here at home. In the Illinois race for U.S. Senate, Democrats are wrestling with a fundamental question. Can ICE be fixed, or does it need to be dismantled? We were there as that question collided on stage in Chicago and then followed one of those candidates back to East St. Louis. On the debate stage in Chicago Monday night,
Donald Trump is not welcome here in this city.
Democrats called to rein in President Trump's federal immigration police forces.
Not a single dollar more for ICE or DHS.
We met Congressman Raja Krishnamurthy in East St. Louis just hours after he stepped off that debate stage.
And if that triggers a government shutdown, do you hold your vote?
I'm hoping that it doesn't. Something has gone dreadfully wrong with DHS, and there have to be changes right now.
What conditions would satisfy you to vote for future funding of ICE and DHS?
Change in management. Kristi Noem should be fired. If she's not fired, she's going to get impeached. It's that bad.
Krishnamurthy already signed on to his primary opponent, Robin Kelly's articles of impeachment.
I have filed letters of impeachment against Kristi Noem, and I'm leading that fight.
At the White House, President Trump rejected that demand.
Kristi Noem going to step down.
No. I think she's doing a very good job.
That divide now shaping the Democratic primary in Illinois' heated race for the Senate.
And we need to build an agency that people can trust.
On stage, Kelly and Krishnamurthy targeted the federal agency's current political leadership, not the agency itself.
I believe we have to abolish Trump's ICE.
You said you also want to abolish Trump's ICE
Yes.
last night.
Yes.
Does ICE exist under a Democratic president, yes or no?
It could, yes. The point is that it has to exist in a form that it's consistent with the will of the American people.
While both members of Congress aim to reform the immigration agency, their challenger, Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton, says she'd go farther.
This agency cannot be reformed. And it doesn't matter whose ICE it is, we need to abolish ICE, period.
So let's look at the numbers. The latest polling shows the public reacting to the heavy-handed tactics of federal police. Turns out over the last 3 weeks, Reuters polling shows President Trump's approval rating declining another 3 points to 38%. That's the low point for his second term in office. Also, 10 months ago, the same poll found 50% of the nation approved of the president's handling of immigration in particular, with just 39% approval at the time, 9 points above water. That approval has eroded down to 39% disapproval, up to 53%. That's an underwater mark of 14 points below average. A different pollster at YouGov found 46% of Americans and 47% of independent voters now support abolishing ICE. Just 41% oppose that idea. That shift in public opinion is now colliding with a question of leadership. Democrats are demanding accountability at the top of Homeland Security. Some Republicans are even joining in on those calls to fire or further investigate Kristi Noem. Other Republicans, though, say that call belongs to the president alone. Here's what Missouri Senator Josh Hawley said to reporters when they asked him whether Kristi Noem should be fired.
He'll decide who he wants to be leading this, and I defer to him. I mean, it's his cabinet.
This all comes after a federal appeals court says the Trump administration ending temporary protected status for Haitians and Venezuelans in the U.S. was illegal. It says Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem exceeded her authorities with those terminations. The appellate panel says she tried to override the power of Congress. She argues the conditions in those countries have improved, so those temporary protection status designations are no longer needed. That ruling says the secretary overstepped her authority. Republicans, though, argue the real danger isn't the administration, it's interference with federal law enforcement itself. Here's other Missouri Senator Eric Schmidt telling CNN this.
Protest all you want. You don't get to interfere with the operations of ICE. You don't get to do that. That makes things very dangerous. So I think it's very important that deportations continue. And they can be done in a very orderly way. That's typically how that happens. But when you have politicians telling people that these guys are the Gestapo, that the secret police, Republicans are Nazis, I just don't think that's appropriate. So the way you de-escalate the situation, you say is, look, we have differences of opinion maybe on this, but step away and let law enforcement do their jobs.
But Democrats say the courts are now giving the opposite signal, that enforcing the law also means obeying it yourself. We asked Illinois Senator Dick Durbin whether ICE can continue operating this way at all. You famously oppose a government shutdown, but you also oppose funding DHS as it stands. What exact conditions allow you to vote yes without triggering a shutdown?
We have 6 appropriation bills left. 5 of them are ready to pass immediately on a bipartisan basis. The only one left is Department of Homeland Security. We've got to make some basic changes in that agency based on the outrageous reports we're receiving from Minneapolis and Chicago of the activity of these agencies. The deaths of 2 innocent Americans, just unacceptable. We need to have a better run and managed agency.
There's a split in your party between abolishing ICE outright and reforming it from within. Which side of that debate are you on, and what would you like to see the future of that agency become?
I'm not going to be voting to refund ICE and the DHS without some fundamental changes in the agencies. I would say that the Donald Trump version of Department of Homeland Security is unacceptable, and they've proven it on the streets of Minneapolis. We need to have a reform of that agency and make sure it follows the law and the Constitution.
I don't know that anyone's proposing this, but if there was a bill on your desk to abolish ICE, how would you vote?
Part of the agency has responsibility that is legitimate. It's been abused by the Trump administration and Secretary Noem. We can change the agency for the better and do it without rewarding those who abused it.
Should Congress impose statutory limits on where Customs and Border Patrol agents can operate inside the U.S.? And if so, where would you draw that line?
Well, historically, we've done that. Unless one of the agents is in pursuit of someone who is here illegally and dangerous, they have limitations to how far their jurisdiction reaches. They've stretched it to the ultimate limit. They've gone from the state of Maine to Minnesota to Illinois and all across the nation. So I think that's one of the items that we need to address if we're talking about reform.
Should immigration agents ever again be able to use private contractors, surveillance contractors, to spy on or gather the data, the private data of American citizens?
I have some serious problems with the Trump administration when it comes to the privacy of individuals and their families. I value my privacy very much, and to think that this information is being broadcast either to agencies of government or beyond is unacceptable.
Senator, I want to switch gears if I can to a different topic for a brief minute. I want to disclose up front, I work for a local TV station owned by Tegna, but you sit on the Judiciary Committee, and that committee handles antitrust and a number of other policies and laws there. What standards should Congress apply when evaluating large media mergers like Nexstar's proposed acquisition of Tegna, particularly when it comes to competition and localism in local news?
We've lost sight of the fact that the American people depend on antitrust to make sure that corporate entities like those that you describe serve the public interest. That means giving the individual citizen the right to hear both sides of the story and beyond, and not to load it up with one point of view, right or left.
Next. All right, Senator, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Next, Missouri voters thought they settled abortion at the ballot box. Now that fight has moved to a courtroom, a trial that could decide whether the will of the voters actually sticks or whether the state can continue enforcing restrictions it lost at the polls. The abortion battle in Missouri is next. Welcome back. Closing arguments wrapped this week in a major Missouri abortion rights trial after 2.5 weeks of testimony. The big issue here is whether Missouri can continue enforcing abortion laws that were passed before voters amended the state constitution to protect that access to abortion. Voters approved those new abortion protections in 2024, that November election. The question now before the judge is whether existing state laws still fit within those new constitutional limits. Critics of the abortion restrictions call them trap laws designed to exhaust the abortion clinics. During the trial, abortion providers and legal experts argued that Missouri's abortion restrictions function as an effective ban. The state argued those laws are legitimate health and safety regulations designed to protect patients. A judge has temporarily blocked many of them, allowing limited abortion services to continue while the court decides whether the laws violate the voter-approved amendment. Within minutes of those courthouse doors closing Monday, abortion providers and a spokesperson with the ACLU of Missouri addressed reporters right outside the courthouse in Kansas City where the case is being decided.
What Missouri voters put into our Constitution just over a year ago, which is that abortion is health care. Abortion is safe, and everyone in Missouri deserves to have safe, effective, and necessary reproductive health care. I think the most important thing to remember with the TRAP laws is they are barriers in place specifically targeting abortion facilities. And what abortion healthcare centers will have, if those are struck down, is the same regulation as any other medical office where these procedures can safely be done. So we're not asking for anything more or less than anyone else. We want these health centers to be treated the exact same way as other health centers.
So what exactly changed when voters spoke up and wrote that new amendment into the Missouri Constitution? That amendment did leave some room for the state to regulate abortion, but only narrowly and by the, quote, least restrictive means possible. All other restrictions are assumed invalid. That's the language in the Constitution today. So I asked Attorney General Catherine Hanaway, which pre-existing abortion-related laws does she now assume are invalid? A lot of folks are watching this lawsuit here after Missouri voters amended the Constitution to presume that abortion restrictions are invalid unless they're narrowly justified. Can you point to a specific abortion law the state is willing to concede no longer survives that standard?
Oh, no, I can't. I can point to a whole bunch of them that I think do survive that standard, like the requirement to have gurneys in clinics, the requirements for sterilization of instruments, the requirement to have physicians who have admitting privileges at hospitals. To me, the case we're talking about really is all about the health and safety of women who choose to have an abortion.
Why should abortion clinics be regulated any differently than other medical offices that provide procedures with similar or greater risk?
Well, I don't think that they are, honestly. These can be very risky, even life-threatening procedures. And many of the restrictions are very similar to outpatient surgery clinics.
The state argues that providers lack standing, yet patients face immediate barriers right now. If no provider can sue and no patient can access care, then who exactly can change these laws?
Well, the legislature absolutely can. And most of these laws have been on the books for decades, long before the Dobbs decision came out, and were held to be constitutional.
So when voters change the Constitution and the state keeps enforcing the same laws anyways, who's in charge here?
Well, when the Constitution got amended, what it did was to legalize abortion. And frankly, a lot of this litigation is almost like a question for the judiciary. What did that constitutional amendment mean? Did it repeal all the health and safety measures that protect women and the unborn? Or is it limited to just legalizing the procedure itself? We know we've already won on the requirement that there be parental consent for abortions. We don't know how these other ones are going to come out.
Coming up, the FBI executes a search warrant, not on a drug ring, not on a terror cell, but on ballots cast 6 years ago in the 2020 election. Why federal agents just seized that election material in Georgia, and why the prosecutor signing off came from St. Louis.
We're senators representing.
5 years after the 2020 election was certified, recounted, litigated, and upheld, the FBI this week executed a search warrant on a county election office in Georgia, seizing ballots from a race the president still insisted as early as a few weeks ago that he won.
It was a rigged election. Everybody now knows that. They found out. People will soon be prosecuted for what they did.
And now here we are. Georgia's Republican governor and Secretary of State both concluded, by the way, that Joe Biden's victory in Georgia was upheld after that machine recount and a hand-operated recount as well. The prosecutor who signed off on that search warrant, Thomas Albus. Here he is, the interim U.S. attorney for Eastern Missouri. Last month, Missouri Senator Eric Schmitt personally endorsed Albus on the floor of the Senate, calling him his former chief deputy and a lifelong proponent of law and order. Schmitt praising Albus as someone who he trusts to wield the power of federal prosecution. We're now seeing that power on full display, used hundreds of miles away from here, in Georgia, to seize those ballots from 2020.
I rise today to wholeheartedly endorse the nomination of Tom Albus to be the United States Attorney for the Eastern District of Missouri. His nomination in particular is special to me, but when I was Attorney General of Missouri, Tom was my first assistant, the chief deputy, when I first came into office.
He's Schmidt's guy, appointed by the president. When I called his office to ask why was he seeking that judicial warrant to seize evidence in a government building nearly 600 miles from here, the answer I got was no comment. When I asked just how common or how rare might it be for a U.S. attorney to execute a search warrant in a distant state where federal prosecutors already exist and work in that jurisdiction, I was given the same answer. No comment. The county election commissioner there, though, he had a comment. He says, come on in. We have nothing to hide.
We have done everything right. We've complied with the law. We will continue to comply with the law. And as far as future elections, I can guarantee the public that our elections will always be open, fair, and transparent, and every legal vote will be counted.
We should note this was no ordinary routine field operation. Just outside the election center, Associated Press photographers captured these photos showing Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard and Andrew Bailey, the former Attorney General in Missouri, now the co-deputy director of the FBI, getting into that big command vehicle as federal agents continued to remove ballots from the building there. Closer to home in Jefferson City, Missouri Democrats are criticizing a specific line item in Governor Mike Kehoe's budget. It would send nearly $250,000 to a former governor's foundation. The Missouri Independent broke this story, reporting the plan would take $125,000 from general revenue funds and another $125,000 from the state's program for temporary assistance for needy families. So which needy family? The former First Family, or his foundation at least. That money would go to the Show Me State's 57th governor, Mike Parsons' nonprofit. It's called the 57 Foundation. That charity says its goal is to educate the public about Parsons' life and administration. Now, Kehoe's spending plan says the foundation also provides essential resources and support to Missourians in need. But ask House Democrat Rachel Prouty, she says, no, there's just not enough oversight on how the state is spending your money. She sent us this quote saying, it doesn't appear that our departments are doing due diligence when they're appropriating these funds. Prouty says they're getting the money out the door, but not in a way that meets the needs of the community. Federal law requires temporary assistance for needy families funds to help lower income families meet their basic needs. States are supposed to use any leftover money in that program to support the goals of that program. In Illinois, former Sangamon County Deputy Sean Grayson sentenced to 20 years behind bars for the shooting death of Sonia Massey. Grayson responded to her home after she called 911 to report a possible prowler. Body camera video showed that encounter ending with Grayson firing his gun at Massey. He was convicted of second-degree murder last fall, now receiving the maximum sentence despite his attorney citing cancer. Afterward, Massey's family said the punishment fit the crime. We're back in a moment to check the record. We've heard a lot this week from politicians and protesters about the police powers of the federal government. Now we're hearing from a federal judge. Let's check the record. From the bench in Minnesota, we hear the voice of Patrick Schiltz. He's no firebrand, and he's no liberal. He's a former law clerk to Justice Antonin Scalia, a federal judge appointed to the bench by George W. Bush. He's a man steeped in sober restraint, precedent, and the discipline of law. And Chief Judge Schiltz says Immigration and Customs Enforcement violated 96 court orders in 74 separate cases just in the month of January alone. 96 orders in less than 4 weeks. Could you ignore your boss that many times in a month and keep your job? Get this, the judge says the extent of ICE's noncompliance is almost certainly substantially understated. He says this list is confined to orders issued since January 1st, and the list was hurriedly compiled by extraordinarily busy judges. Undoubtedly, mistakes were made, the judge says, and orders that should have appeared on this list were omitted. The judge then took special care to address his audience in every corner of public thought. He said this list should give pause to anyone, no matter his or her political beliefs, who cares about the rule of law. Then he put all those numbers into context. The judge said ICE has likely violated more court orders in January 26 than some federal agencies have violated in their entire existence. Why does that matter? Alexander Hamilton gave us a hint as he wrote about the indispensable ingredient of independent courts in Federalist Paper number 78. There's no liberty if the power of judging be not separated from the legislative and executive powers, he said. And what happens without that independent check on a president's power? James Madison echoed in Federalist Paper number 47, that the accumulation of all powers, legislative, executive, and judiciary in the same hands may justly be pronounced the very definition of tyranny. Need a more recent example? Ask Sheriff Alfred Montgomery what happens when you ignore a federal judge's order. he's in custody right now. That's all our time this week. Until next time, we're off the record.